think we're about to feel better at the end of Peter's keynote, and it's my pleasure to introduce him.
Good afternoon. Good morning. I don't know what time of day.
It's just
Good morning. Can you hear me? I can't tell from mine. Great. Thank you, Stuart. I'm tempted because we did this sumo thing. Has anyone been to a sumo tournament? One of the great things, although it gets really boring quickly, is that the sumo wrestlers have 5 minutes to begin. So they're announced, and they both get ready, and then they walk up, and then they throw their hands up and they walk away. You know, beat on their chest a bit, and then they come back. And so I've always thought about starting a keynote that way. Not yet, but I won't. So this talk, when I was talking with Luke and Stuart and others about this, we thought it would be partly synthesis, partly me bringing some new things, but partly a chance to sort of bring together what you and we have learned at this conference. And so the fundamental question is what matters most in the first year experience. A personal note, since Eric started with pictures of cats and children, this is a first year student. She just finished her first year at university. You can tell by what she's doing that she's studying Arabic and public policy. And she's also a very serious dancer. And she took this picture after a 24-hour period where she had 3 papers due. And she said she had to go dance just to get it out. And so that's my daughter. I can't do that. But it's interesting to think about what it's like to be a first-year student and to try to bring the various parts of your life together. And so when she sent me this picture, I was, it's a beautiful picture, and I'm sort of amazed that anybody related to me can do that. But as a father and as an academic, the thing that I was most excited about is she had 3 papers due in 24 hours, and she didn't immediately go to the pub. She said, what I need to do is something that feeds a different part of me. And so it was just in a great session, partly about resilience. And this, to me, is sort of a picture of resilience, both because you can't do that unless you try really hard and practice a lot, but also because it's about awareness and knowing how to make yourself resilient. So there we go. That's my only invocation of my children. But there it is. She'll come back, actually, later. We're here, right, at this space right now. And before we go any further, I just want, on behalf of everybody, to thank the folks who organized and put on this spectacular conference. I've not been to the European First Year Experience Conference before, and it's great, and it's friendly, and it's challenging, and it's practical, and it's really helpful. And we did a lot of this, right? We did a lot of learning, we did some drinking. But there was a tweet yesterday that got me thinking about conferences. And Simone, who's one of the hosts next year, and I were talking last night. And, so, Ella, if you're here, thank you. And this was from Joe's talk about how it's so easy to overwhelm students, right? I don't know about you, I find the same thing at conferences, right? I go to a conference and I meet all these people and they're spectacular. Much more interesting than the people at my own institution. Don't record that. And, and I get all these ideas, and I have a million ideas, and then the conference is over, and I immediately go back to my office and start working on those ideas. And I go, right? And then I have a long plane ride, and then the next week I bump into someone, and they said, you went to a conference, and you're like, yeah, I think it was in Birmingham. So, what I'd like to do to begin, actually, as this time of synthesizing what we've done, is ask you to do something. And I'm going to treat you like my students for a minute. I'm going to ask you to write for a minute. You can write on anything you want, with your thumbs, with your pen, with anything else, in response to 2 questions. What's something important you've learned at this conference about what matters in the first year experience? Recognizing that that's going to be different for different people. So you're answering this for yourself. What's one thing? And then picking up on Joe's thing about not just contacting, but connecting. And Simone's point last night at dinner which I thought was really excellent, which we go to these conferences and we have really great conversations, and then we see those people next year. It's like, who's one person you want to stay connected with over the next year? Just 1 minute to write. Okay, I can tell you're like my students, and 1 minute to write is excruciatingly long. So when you're done writing, turn to the person next to you and just talk about this for a minute. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to disclose who the person is you said wanted to connect with. I'm not. Unless you keep talking, and then I'm going to call you. But I do want to really reinforce that point, that it's worth staying connected. One of the things as a new person to this community I see is there's potential for really interesting cross-institutional, cross-country, cross-context research about things, because so many of you are doing similar things in different places. And so I really would encourage you to respond and act on that second question. On the first one, about what's one thing that seems most important, about what matters most that you learned here. Could a few people call things out?
Connection.
Connection. Thank you.
Belonging.
Belonging.
Relationship.
Relationships.
Individuality.
Individuality.
Partnership.
Partnership. Thank you. I paid her. Yes. I'm sorry. Social media. Yeah.
Implementing all the fantastic points in reality.
Yeah, implementing, yeah. Not just talking about these things in theory, but actually doing them. That's the hard part, right? Yeah.
Vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Just for students?
No.
No? Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with implementing is sometimes it doesn't work. Vulnerability. Other things that seem important? Yes?
Shift of identity.
Shift of identity. For everybody involved, right? Yeah.
Take risks.
Take risks.
Trust.
Trust.
Intentional.
Intentional.
Imagination.
Imagination. Great. Well, I'm going to give you some of what I think I see coming out of this work. And some of it's things I brought in that you reframed for me, and some of it is new to hear. But I agree with everything folks said about the importance of the first year. And I think one of the challenges, just like thinking about a conference like this, one of the challenges is figuring out what is going to matter most in your context and what can you do about this, right? So what can you implement? One of the biggest challenges in U.S. higher education, if you can't tell, I'm from the U.S., I'll use a couple of U.S. examples that I think complement things that I've seen here but are different on purpose, not because they're better, just to give you another perspective. I'll use some U.S. research. But one of the challenges in the U.S. is that often academics say, I know how we could do this, and what needs to happen is those other people need to change. We could do this if those other people, right? You know, I'm a great teacher if I had different students. If the admissions office did a better job, I would be in my glory. Or what we need to do, right? And so my point here is that what we can do is act on what we can do. So, and figuring out what are the key things we can do to enhance first-year experience for all our students is a key question. So the challenge, I think, in this session is thinking about what matters most for you. For me, when I think about this, I think about a quote from Herbert Simon. You may not know him. He won the Nobel Prize in Economics. If you know the word polymath, if you look in the dictionary, that's him. He won the Nobel Prize in Economics. He's also the most cited person in Google Scholar in cognitive psychology and artificial intelligence. It's like, what? Yeah, he has hundreds of thousands of citations on Google Scholar. And so the quote you can see, right? Learning results from what the student does and thinks. And I want to unpack that first part first, and then we'll get to the second part, right? But this is a key thing, thinking about the first year experience, thinking about university experience. We cannot learn for our students. They're the ones who have to do the learning, no matter what we do, right? And my synthesis of what they should do and think goes like this. What we need students to do in the first year, actually through their entire university experience, is 6 things. They need to spend time putting in effort, because learning is not easy, doing things that they find meaningful. One of the challenges I see in my context is we ask students to do things that we find meaningful. I'm a historian. You know, read these documents and write an essay. I think that's spectacular. But they don't. So helping students spend time and effort doing things they find meaningful, they need to get feedback and guidance on this, right? They're not good at it yet. They're novices. So how do we give them feedback and guidance? It could be from us. One of the things I loved about this conference is so much emphasis on peers. And then they need to practice. And what I mean by that in particular is in different contexts. One of the challenges with learning is that students become very good at learning in one place. There's actually research on this that, you know, a physics student might do well sitting in that seat because she learned physics in this room. And she sat in that seat, and literally move her to a different seat and she performs somewhat less well. And the challenge with that isn't that she's going to use her physics in a different seat. The challenge is she's going to use it out there, and she's going to have no clue. So we need to have students practicing what they're learning in different contexts, and then reflecting on what they're learning in their own learning process, what they know and what they don't know, being metacognitive, to use a phrase lots of you might use, but lots of people don't use, right? So we need students doing those things, I think, and we need them thinking 2 things. Whoever said belonging gets a prize. They need to think, I belong here. And when I say that, I know I've heard people from different contexts here say, I'm not sure they need to belong at the university, which might be true. On my campus, we do quite a lot to help students feel like they belong at the university. In your case, it might be I belong in a particular field, in a particular program of study. It might be I belong in school at all. And then students need to have a sense that they can learn this. They need to have a growth mindset. And if we can have students do those things and think these things after the first year, or during the first year, we win, because they win, right? That's what they need to do and think. The trick, of course, is what do we do about that? And what Simon says, spent the whole time to get to that joke. I appreciate that. So because I said Simon says you have to do this, what we do is we influence what they do. We create the conditions, the environments, the programs that create incentives, help motivate them, help encourage them to do those things and to think those things, right? Does it make sense? So that's fundamentally our job. I'm happy to share the slides. They have them already, so but you can take pictures and tweet them too. That's important. Good news, right, at this conference, there's tons of this. I'm just going to pick on a few. I'm not going to go into detail because I would embarrass the people who are doing this, but really great paper and poster on assignment design, some really interesting things on coaching, lots of wine. Oops, that was wrong. The student session yesterday, all of these fundamentally are about influencing what students do and what they think. So I think there's a lot here, a lot on your campuses that already is really strong. I'm going to give you one example from the US of a program. It's relatively new, so you probably haven't heard of it. The research on it that's still new is really powerful and really positive, and it's an interesting twist on a lot of what I've heard here. It comes from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is down the road from me. It's a large, public, very research-intensive university. And this program comes out of an initiative at UNC Chapel Hill about students in transition, about transfer students. So not first years, typically second year students coming into the university. Right? And these students academically were very well qualified, but they tended not to graduate, and not to persist and graduate. So UNC created this program called Transfer United. And one of the things in Transfer United is there's a first semester on campus, 1-credit seminar the students all take. And there's 2 things the students do in this seminar that I think is really interesting. The first assignment they have is to identify upper-level students in their program of study and interview about how to be successful in this program of study. Right? What I think is so clever about that, first of all, is it's not hard, right? It's students talking to students. It's not go talk to a professor or something, right? And then you're supposed to figure out who are the successful students in my program, and then I have to meet them. How do you find peer mentors? Here we go. And then they encourage the students to think together about what kinds of questions to ask. So it's not all about where are you from. It's about how do you study, where do you study, when do you learn, what do you do when you're challenged, and all these sorts of things, right? And the students in this seminar, who are from multiple different programs, then come back and talk with each other about what they learned, right? So together, they're building a community of transfer students who are thinking about what successful students at the University of North Carolina do. That's step 1 in this seminar. The second big assignment is they do an autoethnography. They study themselves for a week. And they're not graded on whether they're good students or bad students. They're graded on how well they do in the autoethnography. Are they honest? And they watch themselves in others. When do I study? When don't I study? Who do I spend time with? And part of what they're doing is comparing themselves to successful students. And saying to themselves, what can I do over a week to behave more like a successful student at Carolina? Does that make sense? So it's a newish program. Transfer students before this program graduated significantly lower rates than their peers from Carolina, academically qualified, equally qualified peers. This program has them at more than 10% higher than their peers of graduation. And this is the only intervention they have. But notice what they're doing here. It's not just peer mentoring, it's self-mentoring. So, M. the Mac. I have no idea what your name is, but you're on Twitter, and I was just in your session. I think she had to go. She did a great session about resilience. And she was thinking about how do we help students, and there was a session from Norway School of Business, too, right? About how do we help students have better self-talk. That's what this program is about. Okay? So what can we do to advance what they do and what they think? Well, we know quite a lot about this, right? And we know small interventions can happen. In fact, looking at this conference, a couple things. One is, I think, this sort of sense of partnership, right? We can't do it for them. They're unlikely to do it alone. So what we need to do is see our work as being in partnership with students. Some people get stressed out about partnership and think what we're doing is replacing staff with students. And I think that's a somewhat off-kilter, off-balance sense of partnership. In the book Stuart was mentioning, the way we frame partnership is saying what you should do in a good partnership is have different people bring different expertise together, right? So as a staff member, when I've co-designed courses with students, and I don't say to them, I have a PhD in history, what should we teach in this course? You know, I have an ethical obligation to teach certain things, to develop certain skills and graduate attributes and things like this, right? But I did not attend the university where I teach. I did not attend a university in this millennium. That's really horrifying. No. I had a typewriter when I was an undergraduate, right? So what do I understand about being an undergraduate? I'm also an expert in my field, or something of an expert. What do I understand about being a novice in my field and struggling to learn some of the basics in history? So when I'm thinking about partnerships, what I'm not saying is, let's all just pretend we're the same. Let's say, let's bring different expertise to bear. Students have expertise as students in your context. They have expertise with the complicated lives they lead. They have expertise as novices in your field. They have expertise often having made it through some of these programs. You know, they did induction, they survived, they saw some students not. What did they see that we don't? And then we bring our expertise and knowledge to bear too, right? So it's not just turning things over to them. It's together. Because we, again, can't learn for them. We create the conditions. In preparation for this book, as we were doing the research, we interviewed tons and tons and tons of students and staff about things. This is actually an undergraduate from my own campus who said this to one of my colleagues in an interview. And I think it's right, way too often. I've got too much to do to actually pay attention to you. I've got a program to do, right? So how do we really pay attention to our students? Joe's point yesterday about thinking about students as individuals. So not just pay attention to generic students, but pay attention to these students, to this student, right? Again, that's something you see, I saw a ton of in this conference. I just did Twitter here because it was easier, and that way I wasn't just picking on the sessions I went to. But things about international students, about older students, about religion and students, about adapting to different student profiles, right? Lots and lots and lots of good attention here to paying attention to individual students. I think the challenge is, William Gibson is a science fiction writer, but I think this is one of the smartest things anyone's ever written. The future is here. The future of what European first-year experience should look like is in this room right now. The problem is it's not evenly distributed, right? So all of our students aren't experiencing all of the things that are happening in pockets on our campuses. And that's the fundamental challenge. I think in some ways we know what we need to do, or we know quite a lot about what we need to do. We just have to figure out how to do it with everyone. Does that make sense? And this is the problem. I want to show you just a little data from the US. I actually read a report that came out recently about UK and social stratification in class and all this, but I feel uncomfortable trying to speak about this. So this is data from the US. And it doesn't make the US, well, it's honest. It reflects reality about the US. On the horizontal axis, the y-axis here, this is your chance of earning a 4-year university degree by the age of 24. On the x-axis here is your score on a very commonly taken college admissions test, SAT. Up here, these numbers are very high-scoring students. These numbers are low-scoring students, although the scale actually goes to down here, right? So it's not that this is the worst-performing students. These are students who would be admitted to university, but not to very selective universities, okay? The top line is if you're from the top quartile of income in the United States. The bottom line, the dotted line, is if you're from the bottom quartile of income in the United States, if your family is. In other words, the key finding here is if you're rich and not very well prepared for university, you stand in odds are 8% better that you will graduate than the highest performing poor kids. Does that make sense? I mean, not is that happy. is that as it should be. But we understand this. And you can see the difference, the difference up there at the top end. So the highest performing students coming in, there's almost a 40% gap. Same thing at the bottom. Right? And this has huge social implications. Because if you don't have a degree by 24, the odds of you having a degree eventually go down quite a lot. And so this means communities, families, fall on this line. Right? So this is an ethical and social challenge in the United States. I think it's an ethical and social challenge from what I've heard in many contexts here, although it may be different. Carol Schneider just stepped down as the head of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and she wrote this right at the end of last year. In the US, there's quite a lot of attention to just-in-time learning and web-based learning, and people call it unbundling. So why do you have to go to Birmingham City for 3 years when you could do a little bit here and a little bit there and some online, right? And Schneider looked at all the data and said the problem with this is that the underserved students, poorer students in our country, do best in environments with strong relationships, with mentorship, with clear pathways to their goals. In other words, they're the ones who most need the peer mentors, the first-year induction programs, etc. Right? So if we unbundle, if we online, if we technologize and massify everything we do, one of the outcomes we could expect, based on the research at least in the US, is that those numbers get worse, not better, right? Now so, what matters most? I think partnerships matter most. I think Joe's point of tailoring our efforts to challenge and support all of our students, both as individuals and as groups, right? Because sometimes in the States, at least, we think everybody is an individual, and you are, right? But you also share certain characteristics. And it's hard to scale programs if you think only individuals. So what are characteristics? There's a program we could talk about if we have time later, Stuart knows about, called the Texas Interdisciplinary Program at the University of Texas. And there's a wonderful article in the New York Times from 2014 called Who Gets to Graduate? It's cited here. And read it. Because what they do is they used analytics to identify the students who were least likely to succeed at the University of Texas. They created a series of interventions for them. Their students now are the ones most likely to go to graduate professional school from the University of Texas. Same students, right? So one thing is we need to tailor our support to all our students. And second is that recognizing that learning is relational, as people have said. So if we're going to support learning gains for students, we need to create relationship-rich environments around learning, right? We need to create relationship-rich environments that encourage students to behave and believe in certain ways. Let me give you an example from my own institution. So Elon University we have 6,000 undergraduates. It's private. I won't tell you how much it costs because people here think 9,000 pounds is outrageous. But it's more than that, right? We do small classes. We're quite selective. But one of the things, and we're very, very experiential. So for our students to graduate, one of our requirements in our core curriculum is students must do at least 2 of 5 things. They must study abroad. They must do mentored undergraduate research outside of their coursework. They have to do an internship for at least 80 hours. They have to do a substantial service learning project, or they have to have a leadership role that's reflective in some ways, right? Students have to do at least 2 of those things to graduate. And when we looked at the data, our analytics on this, what we found is most of our students do like 11 of them, right? Which is great. But there's a set of students who barely get to 2. And those students are individuals, but they also share certain characteristics. The most common characteristics they share is that they're the first in their family to go to university, right? And so we were trying to figure out why these students weren't doing these things, because in theory they have the same opportunities as all the other students. Some of these study abroad cost some money, but we have scholarships for first-generation students and things to study abroad. So it shouldn't be just money. And the difference between 11 and 2 is pretty big, right? So we did what staff do. We sent a survey to first-generation students. Juniors and seniors, third and fourth year students, you laughed, right? Because you know what the response rate was, right? Because students who don't do stuff don't respond. And one of my colleagues, who is head of our core, was talking to a student who worked in his office. Her name is Desiree Porter. When she graduated from Elon with a degree in finance, she had 2 peer-reviewed articles published in higher ed journals. Not so bad for a finance degree. And a first-generation college student. She was an African-American woman, first in her family to go to college, university, excuse me. And Desiree said to this professor, I want to talk to these students. So what we did is a set of staff and first-generation students who we hired created this interview program. And then the first-gen students contacted their peers, third and fourth year peers, and said, we're doing this research project, we want to interview you. These are actually images from some of the interviews. They interviewed around 90 students. Just a quirky, fun thing. A couple times, the interviewer would get sick, and one of us adults would step in, and the interviews were terrible. Generally, they weren't we didn't get to the same thing. Because what we heard from these interviews, what our first-gen partners heard from these interviews, is that these students came into our university and they'd heard about things like internship and study abroad and undergraduate research, but they didn't understand them, and they didn't value them. Undergraduate research was the clearest example. These students, to a person, came in and said, when I got here, I did not see myself as a researcher. You know, I want to get a job, right? I'm not a researcher. And so it didn't even occur to me to think about this. And then I would be, my 4th year, I'm talking to some of my peers, and they're doing this really cool work. I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, I'm doing undergraduate research. And these students would say, that's undergraduate research. I want to do that. But now it's too late, right? And so what we found is students understood in concept what these experiences were, but they didn't value them. First-generation students didn't value them. And so what we've done is we've hired a bunch of upper-level first-gen students to go into our first-year courses and talk about their own experiences doing things like undergraduate research. Right? And they don't make a big deal about being a first-generation student and say poor kids can do this too. They're just living examples of, I'm a finance student, and I'm actually doing a research project in education. And it's going to help me get a job in finance and publishing, right? My point is our students can be partners and allies in doing some of the hardest work with some of the students who seem hardest to reach. But we need to think about which students can help us do that work and how we can use their expertise and what they bring into this work. One more example, just very briefly, from a U.S. school. If you were in the U.S., you'd already be bored because Georgia State now is the institution that gets all the press in American higher education because the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, loves them and gives them millions and millions of dollars. And why the Gates Foundation loves them? Georgia State is it's actually a school quite a lot like Birmingham City. So in Atlanta, Georgia, big city, largely minority-serving institution. But what Georgia State did that was amazing and why they get this attention is between 2003 and 2014, they doubled the number of the poorest students on campus. The number of, in our case, we call them Pell-eligible students, students who are eligible because their family is in deep poverty. That number went from in the 20s to in the 50s of Georgia State's population. And at the same time, Georgia State more than doubled its graduation rate. Right? And so there have been a whole number of studies of Georgia State saying, what did they do? Because if we do what they do, then we get big results we all want, right? This is the finding of that study. Right? There's not one answer to this work. There's a lot of answers to this work. I mean, in some ways, it's back to Joe's point about individuals. We can't, through one program, work with all the individuals on our campus. What we can is create environments that surround all the individuals on campus with lots of opportunities to have meaningful mentoring relationships and engage, right? And if we do that, then we can be successful with these students. And to me, that points back to one of the things I said early in this, which is you can't fix this on your campus. You can't fix the first year. But you can do some things. And those things, cumulatively, will add up to really significant gains, right? So my big question was what matters most. I think these things do, right? You got that point. You get to see my daughter again. Cool. She loves this picture. She's like, I have abs. No kidding. But I'm going to close. I've got references for you. But I'm going to close just with one last thought. And it's from a really fine book that was actually published in the UK about social inequality and higher education globally. The idea here is that what if we think of our institutions as if places, where we behaved as if our society were the way it should be, right? And I want to tweak this a little bit for this context and say, what if we treated the first year as if all our students came in with equal educational capital, social capital, as if they all had the potential to succeed? If we could do that, I think we'd be a long ways towards where we're trying to get individually and collectively. So that's what I want to leave you with. I'm happy to talk about questions and things, but I know we have other work to do too, and I've got references. So thank you.